This is the India Story. You're watching the India Story podcast, and we are here with a very special episode in the aftermath of Operation Sindoor. A lot of curiosity around India, a lot of curiosity around the world. What does it mean for India, for Indian foreign policy? Where will India's strategic thinking evolve from here? Now, if you ask anybody who the top thinkers on Indian foreign policy and Indian strategic affairs are, three of the names that will be in the top 5 list of virtually anybody happen to be Indrani Bagchi, who's sitting here with us, Dr. Happymon Jacob, and Dr. C. Rajamohan, Professor C. Rajamohan, all three of whom we have been able to assemble in this nice, well, it's not exactly a round table, it's a rectangular table at the CEO Aspen Centre. And it's great to have all of you here. So assembling the top minds when it comes to India's foreign policy and India's strategy just after Operation Sindoor. What we're going to try and do is have an open-ended conversation. What did you make of Operation Sindoor? Where do you think we go from here? What do you think we should be doing with Pakistan, with America, with China? Does that sound like a plan?
That sounds like a good plan.
All right. So I'll just do a formal round of introduction. Indrani Bagchi, of course, CEO Ananta Aspen Centre, Dr. Happymon Jacob, editor of India's World, also a director for the Council of Strategic and Defence Research, and Professor Rajamohan, from the National University of Singapore also. Of course, we read you all the time in the Indian Express. Raja, great to have you with us. Let's go first. Let me go in reverse direction then and ask one very simple question to start off with, and then we'll get into the details. Operation Sindoor, how do you think it went? And in the reaction from the rest of the world, better than expected, as per expectation, worse than expected?
I would say the operation itself, I think by the time the full details emerged, it was quite clear that the Indian Air Force had done well. I think the first 2 days, the fog of war, this messaging was not very clear. But I think by the end of the operation, I think it was quite clear that the Indian forces had performed very well, given the constraints under which they were operating. In terms of the global reaction, I would say most of it was along expected lines. Like most of the time when two boys are fighting in the street, everyone says be restrained, less peace and diplomacy, dialogue. And I would say barring, in the case of supporting Pakistan, Turkey and Azerbaijan, generally the reaction was along predictable lines, except President Trump's kicker at the end of it, taking credit for the diffusing the crisis and then taking off after that into all kinds of things like Kashmir and stuff like that. But I think Trump is out of control. I don't think there is a plan behind it. But I think we can discuss more about it later. But I would say it's really broadly expected lines.
Two boys wobbling in the street. That is pretty much the way Donald Trump, I think, put it. And I think that's what infuriated India probably a lot, because India thought that it had been Pakistan has attacked India. It's a terror attack. And India's won a military victory. And here's Donald Trump saying, both of you, be nice, we'll do trade, we'll do behave, have a nice dinner, go out for dinner. Is that one of the things that upset a lot of people here?
Yes, I think it did. Because, the narrative here was that we were responding to we were retaliating against Pakistan-sponsored terrorism. The rest of the world saw us as aggressors.
Did it?
Well, we were the ones, according to them, Pakistan retaliated against India's attacks. The first incident, the other thing that we must remember is the linkage with Pahalgam because of the 13-14 days that took for India to actually respond. That linkage became a little tenuous, if I may say so. It's not tenuous in the Indian mind, but it is tenuous in the outsider's mind. That we took too long. Everybody thought that, remember Israel took 14 days to respond, and but that's a completely different context. You cannot compare Israel, Gaza with India, Pakistan. And I've seen many people try to do that, and I don't think it works. The contexts are too vastly different. So yes, I think that's not, we have fielded, I'm sure all three of us have, and I'm sure others have too, fielded questions about why did you attack Pakistan. So it's a question that, that's a question, that's a narrative problem that.
And this is something perhaps we should, and we will discuss later on in this program. We have some time. How to, if I don't know whether managing the narrative is the right way to put it, how do you put India's point of view across? Because that's been part of the issue, right? You were actually out, you were not in India. We were all being guided by what the coverage was here in India, and it was all Indians talking to each other, and we knew what was actually happening. Abroad, was it a slightly more diffused picture, as Indrani is saying?
Vikram, I think the problem is the following. I think this particular Operation Sindoor, has in some ways created a new, let's say, as they put it, the new normal in India-Pakistan relations. Primarily that India carried out strikes, military strikes, across the international border in mainland Pakistan. And it has inflicted casualties. It has created a certain challenge for the Pakistani side. This does not happen in the past, clearly. So this is the new normal. The world is not used to this new normal in some ways. They're getting used to it. They will get used to it. So the framing that the international community has had about India-Pakistan relations is that Pakistan will do something, India will issue a few statements, and everything is going to go back to normal. This time India broke through. India went ahead and said that this is not going to be accepted, we will not accept it. And therefore, followed up with military action. The world is not used to it, as I said. So I think the uneasiness, the unhappiness, the advice for restraint and caution, all of this comes from the old framework. You create a new normal, and you say this is going to be the new normal, the international community will get used to it. So I think it's a question of framing. I think it's a question of consistently following up within that frame.
So Indrani, your point about 14 days passed before something happened. Has India tried at the end of the day in the Prime Minister's speech and elsewhere to set a new doctrine in place that the rules of the past will work? The minute there's a terror attack, that will be treated as the act of war. That is the first provocation. And anything that follows after that is therefore a retaliation. And we will not be subjected to nuclear blackmail, that we can go anywhere, we can blow up Pakistani air bases. I know India is denying hitting Kirana Hills and saying we never struck that, but clearly everything was on the table at that point.
So, a couple of things here. I think Prime Minister did indeed set out the new set of rules that will govern our engagement, if you will, with Pakistan, which is, as you said, no nuclear blackmail, no that act of terror. And people have asked if somebody just tosses a bomb in a market, does that count? No, it doesn't. Obviously, there has to be a certain level of, it's a Mumbai level or a Pahalgam level or a Uri level, or, not everything works, but, and then everything is on the table. That, as Happy said, there is a way on the ground by the military. You have established that there is no corner in Pakistan that you cannot hit. And they have hit. The one difference between Balakot and now is at the time the burden of proof was on us, because Pakistan said nothing was hit, only a few trees and some goats. This time there is absolute precise satellite imagery to show the before and after, and there is literally no question on the damage that the Indian military has inflicted. There is, I'd say, on the nuclear blackmail, I think, one of the things though, this is not the first time. I think over the last 10 years, from Pathankot onwards, this has been on an escalatory ladder. That at every stage, the fact that a terror attack would take a military response was made very clear in Uri in 2016. That was when we changed the rules of the game. And subsequently, the rules have been refined and sort of escalated, if you will. That the rules have been set. The rules have only to be digested. The point is not that. What I think the bigger statement that was made is that you've expanded the space for a conventional hostilities and raised the space, that space before the nuclear blackmail hit. If you go back to the days, you could not hit terror camps. there was a nuclear threshold was right there. That threshold has climbed steadily. There is now a fairly large space where you can operate at sub-conventional and conventional levels. And that is in my view, that is the real gain from these operations that India has undertaken.
Okay, I'm going to now ask all three of you just a one-line assessment, because clearly in India, we've been seeing the pact. We think it's a military victory and a political victory, perhaps a strategic victory as well. Let me just ask all of you, because you've been following what the rest of the world is saying. In the eyes of the rest of the world, or the impartial rest of the world, obviously Pakistan won't concede it and China won't concede it. Militarily, was it a victory, a stalemate, or a loss for India in the eyes of the rest of the world?
No, I would say the people are beginning to see it was a reasonable case where India prevailed. As the more detailed briefings came out of India, more imagery, more explanation of what actually happened. Because initially it looked like both sides were hitting each other. There was no winner in that sense. So this what I think underlines the importance of actually explaining what's actually happened, give evidence. When that happened after the first 3 days, and then we saw most of the world today sees India hit hard, and Pakistan was the one that went to the Americans and sought an end to this.
Well, I think there is no doubt in the minds of the international community that India prevailed as a military power in this. I mean, the latest New York Times story, for example, it actually lays bare the Pakistani claim that they did a great deal of damage to Indian air bases. That hasn't happened. I think that is also worrisome for some of the folks in the international community, that here is a huge military power and an economic power to sort of boot. It is now weighing down on a smaller state in the neighborhood, which is Pakistan. I think that worries the international community, because for the first time, India is saying that we are going to use our power in order to fight against terrorism. So I don't think there is a doubt on the minds of the international community who won the sort of so-called battle of nerves in this particular case. It's about the fact that India won. Therefore, what it implies, that's a worry in some ways.
Indrani?
Yeah, I think as we continue, there is an appreciation of the military victory or of the military success. They are much more concerned about whether this is two nuclear armed countries going head to head, and at what point does it sort of tip over and become a nuclear war. The fact that, I mean, frankly, the US uses its aircraft carrier and Predator drones and fighters to fight the Houthis, which may be described as a terror group in Yemen on the Red Sea. But the US has a long history of doing that. In India's case, it is the nuclear issue that becomes the...
So that's interesting, because rather they're two different things. One is a big power beating up a small power. That's one way, one might be some concern, but this is the flip side of it, that actually your two nuclear powers and the parity is not that much, which also has its issues. Trump tried to, and the other case, one of the other questions that someone like you would be concerned about is the possibility of hyphenation again. Can there be any hyphenation now, or is the gap too much?
No, I would say, I think to follow on what both Happy and Indrani said, I think over the last decade and more, the economic differentiation between India and Pakistan has been crystal clear. India today, India's GDP at 4 trillion is almost 10 times more than Pakistan's. But I think for most of the international perspective, at the military level, it was still seen, the nuclear factor was seen as an equalizer.
Yeah.
Therefore, both were equal. So that's why two nuclear powers fighting over Kashmir, all the standard lead sentence. I think that is what needed to be broken. And I think that's what India has taken an important step in breaking that sense of parity, because we might see what Pakistan, how it will respond over the next decade. But I think at this point, we've broken that. And I think linked to that is, if you, as long as you keep winning, there will be concern as well as respect.
Yes.
That is the key. So in the end, international system respects only use of power and successful use of power.
Successful use.
So I think in that sense, there would be concern as well as there will be respect.
Yeah.
On the track, though, to take up your point, going forward, that gap, there's no reason to believe will not keep on widening because India can spend that much for 10 times more on defense than Pakistan.
But I would say we are not spending enough. At this point,
I agree
you're
with
still
that.
below 2% of the GDP.
Right.
I think our tasks of defense modernization and intelligence, both are so high that if you want the PM's red lines respected, we need to invest a lot more on intelligence and a lot more on defense modernization. Without those red lines can easily get blurred.
But also, if I may add, I can't agree more with Raj. I'd say that if one of the things that you could see that this was more than the Russia-Ukraine war, this was a future war, a war in the air. No troops were marching to the borders. No infantry was used, and they mobilized, but not that much. But what you did see, the difference between technologies. It was literally a technology market. Who had better technology? Who used that technology better? The thing is, in India, I at least personally, I was impressed by the lessons the Indian military had obviously drawn and taken to heart from the Russia-Ukraine war. If you saw the 4-5 layered air defense system that had been built up, it was, the barrage of Pakistani missiles and drones and what have you, loitering munitions and what have you. But I think both countries buy loitering munitions from the same company in the same country, but that's a different matter. So no, that tells you that the parity, there's a parity issue there. But I think, as Raj very correctly said, that you have to now go way beyond what Pakistan can access, and this is where you should use your military, your economic power. We don't use it enough.
Sorry.
I just want to go back to the nuclear question once more. I think it is important to understand the nuclear question in order to put the Indian victory in perspective. I understand when the international community comes around and says, listen, we are concerned about what's happening in South Asia because two nuclear weapon powers and they have a history of fighting with each other. What if nuclear gets introduced into this fight? I understand that sort of concern as it were. Having said that, I think what has happened this time is that India has very clearly demonstrated that we are going to do something vis-a-vis Pakistan in the conventional domain without actually getting the Pakistanis to even talk about nuclear weapons. So the Pakistanis did not utter the word nuclear weapons. The international community is worried about it. But I think the end result of this, India exploiting that space under the nuclear shadow and above this sort of conventional space, is that the Pakistanis will understand that, hey, we can only get away so far as the Indian use of conventional military is concerned and our use of sub-conventional sort of force is concerned. And the international community will realize that, hey, these guys are not that mad that they will go into a nuclear sort of fight with each other. I think we have carefully utilized that. And therefore, so far, the international understanding that these are not responsible nuclear weapon states, I think that myth also gets busted. It's not just the Pakistani nuclear bluff that has been sort of called, but also the myth in the international system that we are irresponsible nuclear power. I think that myth also gets sort of busted in some ways.
Can I just ask the three of you to let's just take the military lessons from this and then come back to foreign policy. You were saying India needs to expand its military spending, and of course it does. And there will be a lot of thought about the lessons learned from Ukraine, perhaps
and
also
from here.
From Balakot,
Absolutely.
right? And one of the lessons
Sindoor, yeah.
I think one of the major things that emerged from this is that increasingly these conflicts with Pakistan, as you said, are air wars. It's missile wars. So in Balakot in 2019, there was a perception India was outranged by the missiles that were used. India got the Rafale and got the Meteor missile. Pakistan got the PL-15. So that, if you look at why is it that even today people are saying, oh, what exactly happened here? Did Pakistan, prevail in some form? It was whatever the questions are around night one where those terror attacks were hit. Because after that, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems very clear that after that, the Indian air defense system withstood everything the Pakistanis threw at it, Chinese, Pakistani, Turkish. And the Chinese air defense systems had no counter to whatever India was doing to Pakistan. So that was the case after that. Maybe still some lessons to learn on the first night. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would say the first day's air battle, India had some losses. We don't know exactly how many. But I think that also points out how the beyond the visual range missiles were used. And I think as our military spokesman said, look, there will be some losses. I think it's important to understand how those losses took place. But the longer term challenge for us is how do you keep up the technological edge over Pakistan? Now, if you see the debate, there's all this talk about how well the Chinese Dragon aircraft J-10C performed in the Pakistani air battles. PL-15 is the other case. So in some sense, Pakistan is plugged into the Chinese military technology, which is beginning to advance. So I don't think we should take it purely on a one-to-one coverage. So therefore, for us, I think we need to invest more in defense production, in defense R&D, in order to expand the edge. And I think if we don't do that, we'll be in serious trouble. Second, I think if you see all these wars we had Galwan with China, we had Kargil. Each time you are shifting forces from one theater to another theater. But now, if the two-front situation gets worse, already you are pretty tight situation on the Chinese frontier. Therefore, I think the need to devise a strategy where simultaneously you should be able to hold the Chinese in the north, but also prevail against the Pakistanis in the west. That requires, I think, a different doctrine, a different strategy, and a different plan for spending.
And different focus. I mean, frankly, the future of war is water, air, space, and cyber. This is your domain. These are your domains. If we can, you're beginning to appreciate, I mean, for the average citizen, you're beginning to appreciate the importance of an air defense system, or of being able to produce at industrial scale the drones and missiles that you need for this. And frankly, Indian companies have sort of shone in this, whether it is Bharat Forge or Solar Industries or what have you. And I'd say the difficulty that the defense ministry or the defense system had in teaming up with the private sector should be junked immediately. We all know that the defense research sector is sclerotic to the extreme. We know that. I mean, I think one of them, that L-19 or something, isn't that like apparently a reworked version of
L-70?
It's a reworked version of the Bofors. It's an anti-aircraft gun, and it performed brilliantly. But you do need to be much more open to industry participation, to private sector participation, at private sector roles. It cannot be at government roles. It cannot be the L1 system which governs defense procurement, or any procurement for that matter.
So do you agree with that? And I'm actually getting a message out here, and let me see if that's unanimous. At the end of the day, if you're wanting to be a major power in the globe, third largest economy, not part of any alliances, so you're not depending on America or someone else to come and save you. And that's what happened this time. It's not that India had no allies coming in to try and bail it out like Pakistan did. You're fighting on your own. You're looking at a situation where India is actually the only country that has had some sort of conflict, physical conflict, with two nuclear powers in the last 5 years, China and Pakistan.
Yes.
Galwan was with again a nuclear power, so was Pakistan. They're both nuclear powers. They're both powerful. You could be up against both of them at the same time. But what Rajamohan was saying, that you need to perhaps spend more than 2% of your budget on defense. If it means it's a 4-year period, do it, arm yourself, position yourself, make yourself ready for that two-front war. Is that something that has to be done? Pardon the pun, on a war footing.
I totally agree with Raja on that. I think if you, as a major economy, major power in the region, are unable to spend a certain amount of money on defending yourself, in creating systems to defend yourself, I think you're going to be not taken very seriously by your neighbors. Forget about other great powers in the international system. I think, as you said, power matters, and power is what counts at the end of the day. You got to create enough defenses to defend against China, and that will automatically take care of the Pakistani side. Clearly, I mean, the weaker power is taken care of by the amount of production that you or military strength that you sort of amass. But I think this also calls into question in some ways the long-term thinking in our supply chain in terms of defense production, as Indrani said. How much of the private sector are you inviting to involve in your own sort of defense production? I think that's an important question. But more importantly, I think there's a larger geopolitical question here, which is about multi-alignment. multi-alignment is a great idea. It's a fantastic policy, but does it come with costs? I think we must honestly, at some point of time, very, very eruditely answer that question. Does multi-alignment come with its costs? For example, the question that you started with, how many countries stood by us? Is it a function of multi-alignment or is it a function of something else? I don't know. Honestly, I don't have an answer to that. But I think if, as I say, if you're nobody's friend, look at what the Russians are doing. Even the Russian statement, in my opinion, wasn't satisfactory. The Russians are meeting the Chinese, they're meeting the Turkish. So it's all a sort of a, let's say, geopolitical situation which is not aligned in some ways in our favor. So I think multi-alignment has its difficulties and costs. At least I want to sort of put that on the table for our consideration.
Okay, let's address the question. But before I come to that question, just wanted to ask you, both of them are saying increase your spending on defense sharply. Would you agree with that? And to what extent would you take it? What percentage of the GDP do you think we should say next 3 or 4 years? And to his point, be ready to take on China. Because if you're ready to take on China, Pakistan's automatically taken care of.
I would say that it's not just the budget that matters. A lot of capex in defense comes outside your budget. But at the budget, we have to spend at least 3 to 3.5% of your GDP for no other reason that the bulk of your budget on the for defense is used up for pensions. You need to free up money for capex. For that, you just have to go to 3.5 to 4% of the GDP. And without that, but also, it's a question of we have a very unique geography. What works on the Pakistan side doesn't always work on the Chinese side, or doesn't always. Because the Chinese side, you're facing it not just in the Himalayas, where you're facing it in the northeast, you're facing it in the water. So it's not just that one question. For the Pakistan side, you need to develop not just the air defense systems, you need to develop greater covert capabilities. You need to develop better intelligence. You need to develop better eyes into Pakistan, into that it doesn't become an episodic exchange of missiles. It ought to be at a level to keep, one of the things the Chinese do is to use the Pakistanis to keep us off kilter. Yeah. We don't use enough to keep the Pakistanis off kilter. Somebody in the defense forces was telling me that, sometimes I felt we were fighting the Chinese. Everything that was coming at us was
but
Chinese.
you are fighting the Chinese. They're not making any bones about it.
Yes.
For the Chinese, this is a way to battle test their missiles,
yeah.
right? The J-10, and the J-17, PL-15. It's not. You are basically up against, and if there was to be a conflict on the seas, which didn't happen this time, could happen next time.
Yes,
you'll be up against the state-of-the-art Chinese submarines, Chinese.
This is where I think the Chinese defense spending is about 5 times as much as ours. And also, it's not just about the money. The internal reform from procurement, from R&D.
production.
See, those, I think we have a huge agenda, which the government, for example, 4 years ago, they talked about more privatization. It's not really taken off. DRDO reform was talked about, the last few months of the previous second term of the Modi government. They haven't really moved on it. So I think if we don't move on the structural reforms, it can't be just at the time, as I said, episodically, everybody's up and angry at the time of like a war. But I think if you don't do the long-term change.
Exactly. You may spend 4% of your GDP on defense. But if no offense to DRDO, but if DRDO continues to produce our weapons, that 4% is not going to take you anywhere. So you need to have more innovative sort of solutions. The international community in some ways is also willing to help you in producing those top-notch weapons in the country, right? 5 years ago, if you were to go to, say, Germany or Western European countries and say, hey, we need weapons from you or technology from you, they would say, no, we don't sell this to XYZ countries because you are involved in sort of active regional conflicts, etc. But today they're willing to do that. So I think there is the opportunity to grab that opportunity. So it's not, as Raja correctly put, it's not just a function of money, it's also a function of the tools that you use.
If I could sort of play devil's advocate out here, I mean, yes, you should partner with as many countries abroad as you could, but it's not that all indigenous defense systems or architecture is not working.
Absolutely.
Look at the Indian destroyers. Indian destroyers are actually probably among the best in the world.
Absolutely.
You're having this entire air defense system. A lot of it was indigenous.
Absolutely.
Akash was indigenous.
Nagastra was indigenous.
Nagastra was indigenous. So it's not that we don't have pockets of
See, I
it.
think the problem is this. I think, the pockets of excellence in the Indian state-led research. But in the end, DRDO should do research. They're not into production.
Yeah.
See, some PSUs like BL, which done the radars and the air defense, they're pretty good. But in the end, look, the production must go away from a government-controlled department. That you need to get the private. So then they can put in the money, they can put in the resources. So I think I think we've made some initial efforts. So government focus on advanced research. The industry does the actual production, and they can generate some revenue by even selling it to our friends and partners abroad. So in all these fronts,
they give the research to the private sector, which is how a lot of the US military.
No, I'm saying you can do more.
We could also do co-production because, like you're talking about the PSUs, some of the PSUs are massive capacity.
Exactly.
Indian shipbuilders, for example, have a capacity.
I think, Vikram,
8 or 9 ships in the same.
Look,
You could do co-production with Europe.
Moscow docks. So I think they may have already signed it or something with ThyssenKrupp for the new set of submarines. The thing is, everything takes like 5 years.
20 years.
That's the problem. By then,
And those ship lines are lying empty, right? The last destroyer is rolled out. The ship lines are lying empty.
but also technology changes, and technology is not changing like once in 20 years or something. Technology is changing every month. If you're not fluid enough, and if you don't,
I think as you saw in the space sector, see, you kept away the private industry away from defense production. Now, Bangalore, Hyderabad, which have such a big ecosystem, in the space, a little bit of privatization. You've seen the enormous success in this. But we've not fully done that in the actual defense sector.
You don't have to necessarily get everything from abroad. But the point is that if you don't encourage your own private industry, then there's not going to be any cooperation between these two sectors. As it were. I mean, the amount of Indian private sector export of weapon systems or parts of weapon systems to various parts of the world, 50% of that goes to the United States. So encourage them to sort of produce and co-produce within India. I think the talent exists, the skill set exists. Okay, it's about encouraging and creating the conditions for that.
Can I now let's turn to defense? One thing I think there's a consensus among all three of you. For heaven's sake, increase spending to 3%, 4%.
On reforms.
Do it in the right manner, reform it, and build
industrial capacity in India.
Build industrial capacity in India and build it so that you can take on China. Pakistan will be taken care of by itself. I think that sums up what all three of you feel. Let's now go, if I can, asking you for your opinion, country by country. Foreign policy, where are we headed to from here? Now, let's start, I'm going to start with you this time. Let's start with Pakistan. Because obviously, what India would, I think, love is to not have to ever hear the word Pakistan again. We just ignore them. We don't want to talk to you. We don't want to see you. We don't want to hear about you. Sit there and we're just going to ignore you completely. That, I think, is the preferred Indian stance, as can often happen with a really pesky neighbor who we don't want to encounter. Is that a strategy that you think is going to work? Or at some point, do you see the possibility that Pakistan itself says, look, we cannot continue in this vein forever. We as a country are literally going down the tube. At some point, you've got to have that on. At some point, you have to come say that we can't keep on doing what we've done in the past. And at that time, India should think about the possibility of figuring something out.
I think one is, I think we will go back to ignoring them. We will go back to Pakistan, on the other hand, has to do two things. They have to first assess their own systems at the end of this, not just what they achieved, but whether this policy of keeping these terror groups, how far has it worked? My personal sense is the military system in Pakistan will be itching for revenge. They need to show they have the last word. So I'd say sooner or later we can expect another settled round of skirmish. However, I think the most important thing the most damaging thing for Pakistan has been the Indus Waters Treaty being held in abeyance. Far more than the hostilities that we just saw, because Indus Waters Treaty in abeyance, and if the Indians actually do what they say they will do, which is build canals, divert water, build more dams, etc., Pakistan will hurt for its poorest farmer will hurt. And I'd say that is what Pakistan will really be feeling in about 6 to 8 months. And if the Indians continue actually put on ground what they say they will, we haven't yet, this is going to be the real damaging product inside Pakistan.
Pakistan is this huge neighbor to your west. Love them, hate them, but you can't ignore them. That's a reality.
We've
That's
been ignoring them for a while.
Yeah, we've been ignoring them for a long time.
They won't let you ignore
They're
it.
not going to let you ignore it. This is the reality that all that you can do is to change the terms of the engagement with Pakistan. How do you want to engage Pakistan? Now, you don't want to engage with Pakistan on Kashmir question, sure. Change the terms. As Indrani said, I think the next big issue that Pakistan would want to talk to you about is going to be the Indus Water Treaty. But this is going to hit them really hard. So change the topic from Kashmir to water. I'm fine with that. They have to engage these guys. Otherwise, they will keep at it one way or the other. The line of control. If the ceasefire has actually broken down and you're hearing the daily bouts of fire in Jammu and Kashmir, I've done some study on the line of control and the firing that happens there. You're talking about hundreds of thousands of shots being fired in a 24-hour period in a 20 to 40 kilometer area. That's one ceasefire violation for you. And multiply that into 5,000. That was the ceasefire violations that we had in the year 2020, before we had the ceasefire agreement in 2020. So I think unless and until you have something going, the reason why from 2021 onwards, there was a certain amount of peace between the two sides was because there was a certain communication channel that was open between the two sides. Now, they didn't like it. They wanted more attention. They came at it. And now India is saying, listen, we are changing the goalposts. We're not going to talk about this. We'll talk about this if you want. So I think you need to decide the terms of the engagement with the Pakistani side. Ignoring them is not a possibility. We don't have a land for that.
No, I would say, following on both what they said about the Indus Water Treaty, I think your conversations is going to begin on that. Already you've seen today the headlines in some papers. Pakistan wants to discuss the terms of, how do you deal with the waters issue? Because the quicker you get to the capacity to hold water, the bigger the issue it will become in Pakistan. Yeah. So I think it's going to be pretty matter of time. While at this point we say, look, the only talks are through the military channel. But at some point, the question of, how do you deal with the water issue? Because for them, it's a big one. So I think some sense that is going to force some basic change. The other is, what's interesting, I think, is what happens inside Pakistan. We know from history when there was a decisive defeat for the Pakistan army, there's some internal change takes place. If you see 1971, I think what led to the first real democratic restoration, there was the first constitution of Pakistan came in 73. Then, of course, we went back to Zia-ul Haq. But when Zia-ul Haq fell, was in an accident, then you have the return of democracy in some form. Kargil, if we saw the initial phase, Nawaz Sharif tried to get rid of Musharraf. He was not even smart enough in that, so Musharraf came back. So my sense is, what will this do to the internal dynamic within Pakistan? See, I don't believe nothing will ever change inside Pakistan. Yeah. So I think that's where our really role is, keep the pressure up to force that internal change within Pakistan. I think we should keep trying. My sense is we'll be looking out to see what happened now will have consequences politically. I think Happy deals with engages them much more.
I mean, politically, the change that could happen, will the army lose its control? I don't know. But there could be also internal dynamics
within the army as well,
which we're not very sure what's going to happen. What's happening on the Imran Khan front? What's happening in Balochistan? I mean, it's interesting. They seem to have declared independence right now. India's probably not very sure what to do about this. And they're saying, India support us and we're an independent country. Who knows what's happening with the Taliban and the
TTP.
Interestingly, I think Taliban seems to be one of the countries that came out in the middle of all of this to support India more than traditional allies and like France did, which was interesting.
I have a slightly, let's say, contrary opinion here. I think my sense is that you can sort of get into the Pakistani scheme of things and deal with various sort of fissures and contradictions within Pakistan. All of that is going to take a lot of time. You can't spend beyond a point your diplomatic, political, and military capital on setting the house order for Pakistan, right? I mean, I think our best bet, I could be wrong, right? Our best bet still is to sort of try and have a conversation with the Pakistani deep state, as we have had. It's not the first time. We have had that kind of conversations. And tell these guys, listen, if you do this, this is what will happen. So let's sort of have a certain decent relationship with each other. The problem of dealing with the many actors in Pakistan is that there are far too many actors. Now, if you go to Islamabad, the message to Rawalpindi will get lost in translation in Islamabad. We don't want that to happen. And that's
Islamabad, there's no power in it.
But with only translation rights. I mean, that gets lost while the process is all fighting. Our best bet is still you guys.
So, that of course brings me to this entire question of what Donald Trump came out and said there, that, you guys, it's really offensive to India to be put into that same category of saying you two squabbling children need to sit down and talk. And India really objected to Donald Trump saying that I'm going to come in and mediate in some form or the other. And especially when he said I'm going to mediate on Kashmir, it's like literally showing a red rag to the bull. But is it time to consider back-channel conversation through the Saudis, or I don't know if it's the Americans or Saudis or UAE or somebody else, to say, look guys, how long are you going to keep on doing this? You've been fighting India. You've built your state on being anti-India for 75 years. It's got you nowhere. When are you going to change course and try and build a proper country out there? Is there any third party which can do it, and should India ever?
No, we should do it bilaterally.
Or should it be bilateral?
It should be bilateral because you see, we haven't come to this today. We've been at it for 75 years now. I mean, if the Pakistanis have been at it, so have we. We've also been at it. The point is that there is history there. All of these countries have stakes in Pakistan. That is very old. That are all very old. That are not just cultural, but they all have history together. We have no history with these guys. We are only developing interests together now, or our interests are converging in terms of economics, in terms of defense, in terms strategically too. We do not look at the world in the same way, and so.
You're talking about getting the Saudis or the UAE and all into a thing with Pakistan.
Yes. And even America, for God's sake. I mean, America has a very long history with Pakistan. There is a constituency in the US, even today, that is much more indulgent of Pakistan than it is of India. And if we don't recognize it, no matter how special your relationship is with America, that space remains. Whether it is shrunk, whether it is, I mean, if Osama bin Laden had been found in India, we would have been cast into space. Osama bin Laden was found in Pakistan, next to the Pakistan Military Academy. 2 months ago, Donald Trump cleared $400 million for the Pakistan Army. So clearly, there is
and you still have Pakistani spokespeople going on American channels and saying, you see, you must recognize we're a key ally in the war against terror, and the person doesn't fall off their chair laughing.
No, they don't. So we have to, we cannot possibly, I think talks right now not going to happen. And to be honest, in a sense, we have failed in developing pressure points inside Pakistan. We should have. We don't.
I mean, are Baluchistan or the frontier provinces pressure points, or does that enable them to say you're equally a sponsor of terror?
I certainly don't think that we should get into that.
We shouldn't get into that, but it's not a question of finding a separatist organization. Then how different are we from them?
Exactly. That's what I was thinking.
But that's not a...
So I think what the methodology is can be sort of, we can have different opinion about that. Should we bribe the Pakistani generals? Should we sort of engage them bilaterally? Should we get the Emiratis or the Americans to engage these guys and put some sense in? I don't care. I think the end goal is what I'm concerned with. My end goal is that I don't have the time and the capital to spend on a country to my west where I have no opportunity. My opportunity is elsewhere. My opportunities in the Indo-Pacific, my opportunities in the FDAs, in the Gulf, with the international community. I'm not going to spend one paisa beyond what is required, which is probably, I'll put that in defense. rather than sort of circling around Pakistan. I don't have the diplomatic or political, wherewithal to do that.
So fortify yourself and wait and see what Pakistanis do. Maybe they'll come to their senses, I think is what
Yeah,
you seem to be saying.
They won't.
What do we do about let's turn to America then, right? So America has been quite literally the Great White Hope for a long period of time, 20, 25 years, strategic relationship. Donald Trump comes, a lot of people have very high expectations of him. He's going to be good for India. Obviously, there are statements that Trump made during Operation Sindoor and afterwards, including most recently telling Apple don't have production in India because, do it all there. Any other president had done that, then, Delhi would have been feeling that it's literally, you're heading for conflict. Because it's Trump, he doesn't necessarily mean it when he says that, oh, this Kashmir problem has been on for 1,000 years and I'm going to come in and I'm going to solve it. So that, is India giving America a bit of benefit of the doubt, saying some of it is just Trump, not necessarily a change in American policy?
No, I would say, I think it's important, I think there's a lot of anger and emotion at the way the American statements have come out in the last few days. I mean, first we go back to the early 90s. In 1992, 93, the Clinton administration came. You had publicly, they came and said, we don't recognize the accession of Kashmir to India. That's where we were 35 years ago. From that, I think we've come a long, long way where the US, our relationship with the US has changed. Kashmir and Pakistan, there's no longer that hyphenation. And people forget, it's the same Trump administration. In 2019, after the, Pulwama strike, in fact, they said, go and hit. And they forced Pakistan to hand over Abhinandan. And then in August, when we did the constitutional amendment in 2019, it was the US, France, that stood by us in the Security Council to prevent China and China and Pakistan from internationalizing the Kashmir question. So I think if Trump's own record in the first term was one which said, look, guys, we are with you. You want to change the status of Kashmir, we're not going to let that become an international issue. So what has changed? And I think that is the question. Why is it different this time? I think that's an important question to ask and to answer. And I think what we've seen happen in the second term is the dominance of the so-called MAGA faction within the US, which has become a lot more isolationist, which is saying, look, guys, we should have nothing to do with the world. Let's focus on our own interest. Let's not get into these various things. So that's one part. So the MAGA faction, they make America great again faction, is saying, we're against wars. In fact, one reason, Indrani will know this too, the National Security Advisor Mike Waltz was sacked, was because he was seen as too pro-Israel and trying to push for a war against Iran in the Middle East. So I think they're saying, whether it's Ukraine, whether it's everywhere, we want to pull back. So that's one strand. The second strand I think we have to deal with is he's looking at wherever they go, guys get together, make money, be happy, like his speeches in Saudi Arabia. Look, Iran, golden future awaits you, give up this nuclear nonsense, come in, make money. So that is other aspect. The third aspect, I think, on the Apple issue is very important. I think we have not debated this enough. For the last 10 years, the Biden administration, the Trump administration was saying, let's get production out of China to China plus one strategy. That is, get other countries to produce so that the US is not totally tied to China. But what Trump said personally, I don't know if that's still the broader administration policy, he's saying, no, you come back home. I don't want you going to India, Vietnam, and all these places. You come home. In fact, that is the root cause of the tariff strategy, where he's saying, produce in America. And, you've done all this in China. In fact, as in his own words, we suffered for that. Now we want to do the same thing with India. So I think there is, again, it's a MAGA argument, produce in America, reshore to America, rather than friendshore to partners. Now, is this the policy? If you read the joint statement of Modi and Trump, it's not so clear. They were saying the opposite thing. So I think we have to be patient, wait how this settles through, rather than get rattled by everything that he says.
Just on that point, I think we must have modest expectations from the United States. The Americans are not going to fight our wars. We have to fight our wars. Just like we don't fight the American wars, right? I mean, the Americans have been in Afghanistan, Iraq. Did we fight their wars? We didn't. There have been times when we have not stood by the Americans on some of the American global questions. So just like that, it is to be expected that they're not going to stand by us, come what may. That's not how states function. It's a big country. We are a big country. They are a bigger country. I think there will be differences. There will be statements. You got to manage that relationship. I think it's not an all-weather friendship that we are looking at.
In fact, the Indian position, to Raja's point about MAGA and how it is different, to that extent, India as an ally, and by the way, this is not just me saying this, Marco Rubio, Mike Waltz, many in the American administration have been saying this. India is to that extent the sort of an ally that America seems to be looking for, which is saying we will take care of ourselves, we are relatively independent, we can fund ourselves and spend 3-4% on defense and take care of part of it. We're not asking you to look after us. So to that extent, India as an ally should be appealing not just to America, but also to the MAGA fashion. Would you agree?
Yeah, but the problem is that if the Americans need an ally in India, what is that for? Is that for China? Are the Americans serious about China? I'm not so sure. Looking at this administration in the United States, I'm not sure what the grand strategies of the United States America today are. So I don't think we should run into that embrace of the United States today under the Trump administration, not knowing what the Americans want at the end of the day. So I think this is a relationship that we're going to manage. The Americans and Indians are closer to each other than ever before in their history, sure. But that doesn't make us all-weather friends.
See, for 8 years, both Trump and Biden said, China is the problem, we want India as a partner.
Exactly.
Now, this guy has come with a different approach. This is his own second term. He's saying, look, I want to cut deals with all the powers. I'm not into... So we shouldn't have any expectation that, look, we are fighting China, therefore America must support. In any case, we didn't ask for support in the Gulf War crisis either. So I think we got to recognize the change in this. Look, sovereignty, what is it about? You can't expect everyone is all the time saying, great India, fantastic, whatever you do, we are with you. Policies are changing, actors are changing. Therefore, the need to adapt, to deal with in a mature fashion.
Okay, let me see with unanimous. They're saying, of course, there's nothing radically changed. America has changed. It's not that the strategic relationship has to that extent changed, but don't rely on them because it's a different sort of an administration now.
Look, to Raj's point, in Galwan too, the Americans came in, gave us the kind of intelligence that we would not have got otherwise. So they did help.
We didn't want to be seen as taking
They didn't want to be seen as taking credit, and it was the same Trump. If it wasn't for American intelligence, we would not have been able to repel a Chinese attack in Arunachal Pradesh in December of 2020. So so it's not that they don't. It is that they are working on a different,
internal struggle,
on a completely different matrix of American power. That the nature of American power, the definition of American power, the definition of how they see their own future is changing, and it impacts the world. It impacts Europe, it impacts the Middle East, it impacts in India, and they will make so it's not a question of rely. It is we will rely to the extent that we have before. They will rely. Listen, there is one thing that we can be crystal clear. No matter what Trump says and how they position this, the MAGA crowd in America is very serious about a decoupling from China. That is a bottom line that you can feel with anybody you speak to in Washington. That has not changed. People around Trump, his own people, are deeply committed to a decoupling.
So
of
eventually,
China.
that India versus China thing.
I think for a long time, and I don't think Americans made that. The American strategists in office make that mistake. I don't think the Indian office makes that mistake. Strategic commentators make that mistake.
The president is expansive.
Which is that this China-India positioning of I am your alternative is nonsense. India has been balancing China without America forever. But we do it in a different way. We are a different kind of economy than China. We are a different kind of power. China is not the kind of power that we will be able to deter in the traditional way. China has more warships, more destroyers than America today. There is no universe in which America does not want to decouple from China or does not want to keep China in its place. You will have to, as a growing power, you will have to find the gaps in the evolving order, make use of the gaps so your foreign policy does not, I mean, we should not, we live with all these little ideas about whatever it is, non-alignment, strategic autonomy, or in this, if you read Indian Twitter, let us go back to the Stone Ages kind of thing, or bring the Cold War back. We like our Soviet Union. That's just fantasy. This is a world which is evolving so fast because the biggest guy in the block is moving
and changing internally.
and therefore you have
I mean,
to
if
find
you go
that.
by Indian Twitter, there are only two countries India should be friendly with, which are Israel and Russia. And we should
I
forget
mean,
the rest
come
of the
on,
world,
it's
right?
not.
That's essentially what
Yeah.
the consensus would be.
Yeah.
Let's turn then to China, because it's almost one of those lines in the sand, or whatever you can call it, that India is likely to come up against China. You're not likely to have a rapprochement with China. You're not likely to have a détente with China. China will work against India's interests, and that is the one thing that you can put on the ground and say, okay, let's plan everything that's around that. Would you agree with that point of view, or do you think that as the world changes, who knows, we could get back to a slightly more benign equation with China at some point?
No.
I'm very clear in my mind.
She said no.
I hear.
Ask me that question.
I hear. But I think internationally, structurally speaking, China is India's principal contradiction. There's not taking away from that fact and that reality. That's going to be the case. That is the case. That has been the case for some time. The question is, how do you deal with your primary contradiction? Can you deal with that primary contradiction, which is 5 times your size, in an international system which is in flux, which is uncertain, which is unstable, in the traditional sort of balancing sense of the term, or not? I think not. I think there are smart ways that you have to devise in order to deal with that country, which is next door. For the first time in our history, we have a superpower rising next door. We haven't had it there any time in our history. So, how do you take on this country? This is our second largest trading partner. This country has a huge sort of disputed border with us. This country is upsetting the traditional balance of power in South Asia.
$100 billion trade surplus as well.
$100 billion trade surplus. And I look at Washington and I say, all right, probably for Washington too, China is the principal contradiction, but they may not necessarily be seeing it that way, this current president, or they may not be sort of acting on it. Can I depend on these guys? I can't depend on these guys. So I think I will have to have a toolkit in which there are several shades of gray. There are several shades of subtle balancing of the China challenge. As it were, you got to trade with these guys. You got to talk to them about climate change. You got to be in the SCO, in the BRICS. You got to work with them on global governance. At the same time, you got to keep your gunpowder dry. It's not a simple.
You got to be ready to militarily defend against them. You're saying,
Absolutely.
and also try and get some of the factories to move from
It's
China.
not a simple relationship.
You said a very emphatic. I mean, that was a longish answer. You had a very quick answer that we heard on the side, which was no. Would you like to elaborate? On that?
Yeah, it is. There is literally no. I think we have been. We would be fooling ourselves if we believed that China would not stop India's rise in any which way it can. Pakistan is so useful. It's tailor-made for that. The more we sink in the Pakistan hole, the better it is for the Chinese.
Absolutely.
So that's been China's game for a while. We get romantic about Pakistan. We don't look at it as a subset of your China problem, which is
Pakistan's a subset now of the China problem. You're saying that emphatically.
Pakistan is a subset of your China problem.
Is it possible, just to sort of take that forward, is it possible that even what happened right now, Pahalgam, because this is something which I remember talking about or tweeting about it just after Pahalgam happened, why now? Is it just a coincidence that as factories are thinking about moving out from China to come to India, suddenly Pahalgam happened?
So I think that maybe it wasn't so beautifully choreographed, but I'd say that what impelled Pahalgam was, I don't know if you saw, but this is a new group, a new generation of terrorists that are being trained in Pakistan. Much harder, much tougher people. Taking a very strict line on religion. One of the things is to again destabilize Kashmir. You've been talking from the rooftops about how normalcy has become such a beautiful thing in Kashmir. For 4 years, everybody in Kashmir has been reaping the benefits of tourism, particularly from the rest of this country. And this, in one fell swoop, that's gone. I'd say to bring Kashmir back to the non-new normal or the old normal, where that uncertainty, then the statement that Hindus are not welcome in Kashmir was very, very important in my view.
Raja, everyone else was it seems to have a consensus in China.
I broadly agree with them. I mean, I think China is fundamentally a huge challenge for the next 2 generations or so for India. And the options are fairly demanding for India. So therefore, I think you got to manage them. You can't wish them away. They're on your neighborhood, a border of nearly 4,000 kilometers. So I think it is there. Question is, how do we balance it while at the same time not provoking it into a conflict that you don't want, while at the same time see what are the economic gains you can make. So this is really, rarely has a country faced this level of challenge. And I think managing it would be our greatest single task for the next 2 generations.
Well, it doesn't help, of course, that if you look at other countries, it doesn't help that our neighborhood is not particularly, it's probably the toughest neighborhood on the planet, and there are irritants happening everywhere from Nepal to Bangladesh to, Maldives, you name it. If you look at the other countries, though, I mean, I know on Twitter and other things, a lot of people say, Russia is there, let's be friends with Russia. And Russia is, of course, there, stood by India, but perhaps not as strong as it once used to be. The ability of Israel to really influence things in our neighborhood is very
sometimes a negative.
Is completely non-existent.
Non-existent. Yes, armed supplies will come, but it's not that Israel is going to come and say, okay, we're going to handle China for you or Pakistan for you, and more probably should they. In a world of multi-alignment, what are the other possible poles in which India can build relations? I mean, Quad is sometimes spoken about, Japan, but
Quad will endure. You may have been following some of the recent commentary on Twitter that said Quad will die at the end as a result. This is nonsense. There is a completely different reason why Quad exists. The Quad will be there. The diversification, and I think the diversification of foreign policy, as I think Happy spoke about it, will continue. And that's fine. You're at a stage of your development where you do need, where friends are friends today, but not friends on a different occasion. And that's fine, because you behave with them in exactly the same way. You are diversifying your weapons purchases away from Russia, but you're buying some of your energy from Russia because you want to offset the fact that that you're getting cheap oil from Russia, but you're not getting cheap oil from the Middle East. You are also playing the game. So it's not like India's sitting there like a debutante at a ball waiting to be courted. That is, you are a player. Be the player.
Be the player on your own strength.
Be the player. Exactly. Play the game. And there are some games which are short-term games. There are some that is a long game. But that flexibility, that mobility within the policy-making system has to be...
So you're just back from Europe. So, Quad aside, Europe is another country where obviously the Russia factor plays very heavily on many countries in Europe. Russia's on their border. Is Europe a bloc with which you think India can build a certain amount of strategic convergence, or no?
I think so. I think Europe is facing a very unprecedented strategic predicament in some ways. Thanks to Russia, thanks to the abandonment by the United States of America. They're looking for partners. They're looking for partnerships around the world. I think India comes up as a natural partner for the European powers, both individually and as a collective. But I think I want to sort of, expand that conversation and say that it is important for us to not to get offended too easily about, hey, somebody is not standing by you, somebody is not helping you, or not saying the right words. It's all right. I mean, that's how the international system functions. You don't, as both of them pointed out, you don't stand by them at all points of time when they need you, when they need your support. So I think it is important, one, to sort of take it on your chin, number one. Number two, we should also stop believing in our own rhetoric. We believe in the global South rhetoric. Somebody from the global South voiced a pro-India sort of statement in the recent past. Nobody. We talk about multi-alignment. Well, what is multi-alignment? At the end of the day, it doesn't really work. So I think we should have a certain honest assessment about our own capability, about what we can do, what help to expect from who. rather than sort of believing in those mantras and mantras will come to our aid, they won't come to our aid.
But other than the people who are not coming to our aid, there's a lot of anger in India about countries like Turkey. And Turkey, I think, is completely justified. Turkey's been working against Indian interests forever, and I've never understood why every second flight to Europe is going via Istanbul. It's something to think about. Turkey, Azerbaijan are the new hate figures for a lot of Indians.
Turkey is not just a problem for India. Turkey is a problem for the European Union. Turkey is a problem for NATO. Turkey is a problem for the United States. Turkey is a problem for a lot of countries
and
in
yet
the
Turkey
neighborhood
is a member of NATO.
of NATO.
NATO has not yet expelled Turkey. Turkey has a fairly big industrial base. They attract more tourists than we do. More Indians want to go there. I mean,
And having said that, many of the Gulf states, 10 years, 15 years ago, they were not friendly towards India. Today, they're very friendly towards India. So I think things have changed in favor of India too in the neighborhood. It's not just that, Turkey is doing something and therefore we have lost all of those things we haven't.
tomorrow
I think
Israel,
the outrage against Turkey is smaller, right? You don't show outrage against the Chinese. Actually, Chinese have given all
Exactly.
the fighter aircraft, missiles.
What is
I mean, China is a known problem.
Turkey-
It's a known
Turkey-
enemy. Like
Turkey-
Turkey, I think it's really coming up to the
No, it's
surface
because
of
we were
how-
not paying attention to it. It was really marginal. I mean,
It
in a
was
sense,
always
historically,
there.
they were always been with the going back to Cento and 1950s. But I think, look, sometimes you have to take some things in your stride.
Yeah.
You can't expect everyone to come to your side. So if it's there, it is there. But we deal with it as a grown. I think this part of the problem, we're getting rattled too easily.
We don't. We
Our
all
domestic
send-
you are not
discourse
big,
sounds.
no big
We'll not
power
go on
gets
tourism
rattled
to
the way India does.
Turkey. We'll not go.
India's just, we're just so thin-skinned. We're a civilization of 5,000 years. We've
Yeah.
been
So the fourth
invaded-
largest economy.
Exactly.
We should behave more.
Wear it on you, wear it lightly.
Okay. I'm so interested. It's so interesting. But the last thing that I was about to come to sort of plays off from this, and you're saying don't be too thin-skinned, is the really important question of how does India project its narrative to the rest of the world? And if I can sort of frame the problem for you and then see if you guys can help find solutions to it, the real issue is how does India get its voice to the rest of the world? I mean, so Indian television news channels are catered for a domestic constituency. If you have the rest
They
of the
should be
world
banned outside India.
banned outside India is a pretty strong word to use, but okay, let me try and find a polite way of putting this. They're not necessarily the best ambassadors for the Indian position globally. Is that
No, I think you're marketing
They're
outrage
factually
every
incorrect,
night.
mostly.
okay.
See, it shows that every night you have to have an outrage. But you see, but foreign policy can't be made in TV studios, right? I mean, that you need strategic communication, you need a sense of responsibility. Where I think that's where the traditionally, I think Indian discourse was fairly moderate, and informed. But I think to some extent that's been damaged. And I think you have to find alternative ways of actually getting across the message.
I mean, I agree. So let me just finish stating the problem. So Indian television channels are not necessarily where people in the rest of the world are going to be getting credible, high quality information about India. Their own press, the international press, has got its own issues with a number of things, restrictions. They feel that the press is under attack in India, so they are not very particularly favorably inclined. And then what you have is on social media. If you come to social media, you encounter what is now one of the largest. There are a lot of opinionated Indians, and some of them are trolls, which then end up alienating X number of people. Now, they're not only Indian external people; they're Indian internally, including to our foreign minister, our foreign secretary, who just had an unfortunate experience. So, in short, I think if you look at that scenario, how is India communicating its point of view to the rest of the world?
Let me put it this way. I mean, just a root issue here, which is Indian diplomacy, Indian foreign policy have also become more confident. They have also become more proactive. They've also become more, let's say, communicating to the rest of the world that we are a major power and we will do what we think is right. The media is only, in some ways, reflecting that 10 notches higher. That's the problem here. The media of the 1990s is not the media of the 2020s. The media of the 1990s was somewhat more innocent. Today, the media has lost its innocence in some ways. So I think in some ways, this is a reflection of the self-confidence that you see in the Indian foreign policy. But the media probably takes it to an extreme, which is
where self-confidence becomes aggression.
Which is a problem. But I think there is a need for the the responsible Indians, responsible media, responsible think tankers, and for the strategic community to communicate to the rest of the world that, hey, we are doing something in our national interest, and these are the reasons for it. I think that communication needs to take place. I think we sometimes take the argumentative Indian argument a little too far. And that's what is happening in the media.
I was doing Shashi on the India Story podcast a week ago, and he essentially was also reflecting to it. It's actually interesting that some of the most, obviously the government will communicate, ambassadors will communicate, it's their job to communicate, but sometimes you need the non-government communication and societal communication to also happen. So people are, because government channels and government diplomats speaking will be seen as being government. You should need to talk to other people to get a credible sense of what's happening. Shashi, I think that's what Shashi Tharoor was saying to me last week, that we need to find a way of getting a broader range of spokespeople, if you like, for India. People who are not officially Indian spokesperson, but who can start reflecting what is actually happening out here. I mean, conversations like this, I think.
Well, you have to then be open to their criticism also. And you can't shut them down just because they criticize you. That doesn't speak of our own maturity. They have their own spokespeople, and in fact, they're on TV as well as on social media. The government has people that speak for the government. Who are not part of the government, but certainly who reflect what they say that the government is thinking or the government is doing. The point is, on foreign policy, you have to tread a lot more carefully than in domestic politics. This sort of warriors are good, as you said, for a domestic audience and good for domestic issues. In the rest of the world, you're playing a different game, and you have to play a quieter game. You don't play a loud game. The loudness always boomerangs. And if you looked at the coverage on Operation Sindoor, we had people calling saying, have we attacked Karachi? Have we taken over Islamabad? Have we invaded Lahore? I'm like, really? And so this was all being broadcast at prime time, at a very high pitch by Indian TV channels. You are then wondering, is this coming from the government? Is this coming from your own imagination, or is this coming from where?
Because interestingly, the DGMO's own press conference, that's what suddenly gave a lot of credibility. They were very sober, they were very factual, they had nice images. And they said, this is what is happening. And that's when
because they were, the TV channels were not even at the sites.
Yeah.
That was what was even more troubling. That you were showing visuals, but your reporters were not
battle
there.
fatigue.
Okay, I think we've established that TV channels are not necessarily the best source, and neither is social media, quite frankly. So then,
I think the newspapers still, I would say, have been.
Go back to the newspaper, the print
but people
media.
don't read newspapers. Who reads newspapers in the rest of the
younger
world?
people don't read.
But whatever else, I'd say newspaper coverage has been much better and continues to be. They continue to be the people who break stories. They continue to have a more correct point of view.
But I'm not sure how many people in the rest of the world.
Young people don't read newspapers. I mean, that's a problem. But I would say, I think what you're saying, I think more conversations like this or more outlets that provide a basis which is available for the international community. Because I think people are also beginning to recognize, even domestically, a lot of the channels are really entertainment, right? I mean, people realize it's not really news. So I think filtering out a lot of that becomes necessary for any analysis. But I think more outlets, and I would also say more welcoming attitude to foreign correspondents, getting more outsiders to come in, visit the country, that becomes very, very important, and not just treat everyone with suspicion. And I think that xenophobia has crept into our culture in the last many years.
Very quickly, 3 points, Vikram. One, I think the good thing is that much of the international community doesn't really watch Indian TV channels. They're going to go by the traditional newspapers and blogs and things of that kind. That's number one. Number two, you can't also police these things beyond the point. There was a time when I think in Pakistan they put out a list of authorized people who could talk to the media, especially the retired folks from the army, etc. I don't think a democratic country like ours can do that.
And shouldn't, because that destroys credibility.
Of course, shouldn't be doing that. The third thing is, I think we need to have a lot more responsible forums such as this, where people sort of, with evidence and with rational arguments, put things out and engage in that kind of a conversation. And I think to that extent, I don't think it's a great idea to ban say, for example, the Chinese media, platforms in India, or even the Pakistani media platforms. If you want to know that country, if you want to defend against a country, you need to know that country. Without looking at what they're producing, how are you going to do that? I think it has to be more sort of, let's say, long-term.
More confident as well.
More confident, exactly. That's the.
Well, I guess, one of the answers that we got from all of this is that have more conversations like this. By all means, please follow what Professor Rajamohan, what Dr. Jacob, what Indrani Bagchi, people like that, what they are saying, listen to them, get real perspectives, have conversations that are hopefully a bit more meaningful.
During wars, these things take place. I mean, the Pakistanis have gone on an overdrive with their propaganda. So I think it is to be expected that on the Indian side too, there will be a certain amount of exaggeration of things, which is understandable during wartime.
But over a longer period, find a more systematic way of getting that voice across. Well, it's been a real pleasure to listen to all of you. I have to say that if you actually heard them, you don't need to go and look for a MA in international relations and Indian foreign policy. Just record this, keep listening to what they all had to say. And you'll get a pretty clear understanding of Indian foreign policy, what it is, what it should be, and what some of the suggestions are that Indian policymakers may also want to take a look at. Thanks a lot for watching.